sun's still so bright. But it is 6 o'clock, so it's time for the Soquel Creek Water District meeting to start. A roll call would show that we're missing Director Jaffe. He may show up during the meeting. And there's no public hearing tonight. And so the first item would be the consent agenda. Any motions or?
I would move we approve both of those minutes.
Yes, I'll second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, consent agenda is done. The next item is oral communications. So this is the time where anyone that wishes to speak on an item not on tonight's agenda, this would be your time. Welcome.
Good evening, Becky Steinbrenner from Aptos. I really want to thank the district for hiring a Native American observer to be on site during your trenching and water main construction work in the Aptos Village project last year. That to me speaks a lot about the importance that you place on the archaeological site, CASCR 222. One of 5 sites, archaeological sites, Native American sites in the area. And I just really want to thank you for that respect and making sure that those areas, as the trencher was going through, were carefully observed and treated with respect, and the articles found were treated with respect. It was actually through the EIR that your district did that I discovered the significance of that site. It was really downplayed in the initial study of the Aptos Village project. So I, again, want to thank you for the good respect that your district has paid and continues to pay to the archaeological site. And I also want to thank you for putting the page numbers on your agenda. That really helps me plow through and find the areas of where I want to find things. So thanks a lot. It was a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Seeing none, I'll see if board members have any oral communications.
I do.
Yes, Carla.
Well, I attended the Stormwater District 5 Stormwater Committee meeting today, and the principal advantage of that was that Stephanie Harlan is now on the committee too, as the Capitola designate, and she is also still working on the sanitation committee for the county. And she came back with the news that they're at long last dealing with the pump station at Nob Hill. And they have they're really going for it with a chemical thing to suppress to deal with the sulfides. And they have the specs and everything. So says that has been a major thorn, since it's continually associated with the district rather than where the responsibility line where it belongs with the county, county sanitation district, that I'm glad to hear it was finally going to be solved. And I did bring up for the first time a request to include stormwater, stormwater recharge in a list of possible projects for the future. Because they released their budgets. That was what the vote was about today. But they don't have any mention of any kind of project like that. So it's really time to bring those guys.
Good.
Bring them into it too. So that's all.
Great, thank you. All right, then we'll move into administrative item or reports, which is the board planning calendar is the first one.
Yes, a couple items. Let's see, the public outreach standing committee meeting is Tuesday at 10:30 of next week, and then followed the next day by the supplemental supply meeting on Wednesday from 4 to 5. Those are public open meetings. Also, although it'll come back at the next June meeting, I just want to make people aware that the notice of preparation for the EIR will come out at the end of June. And there'll be a scoping meeting on July 12th at Twin Lakes Church. So you might hear a little more about those on June 20th also, board meeting. And I'd like to point out, although it'll be brought back at the subsequent meeting here on June 20th, that the city of Santa Cruz has provided some responses to Jerry Paul claim about a less expensive solution, so point by point. So I'll present those to the board as the next meeting, bring those to you.
Okay. Yes, please.
I will not be able to be at the Wednesday 14th supplemental supply meeting, so I think Carl is the alternate.
Carlos, the alternate, okay.
Can you be there?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the calendar?
Nope, that's it.
All right, then anything from the Mid-County Groundwater Agency?
Yes, there is. I have an image on here maybe you can find if you pull up. So a couple items to note on there. It's behind this, so it's a separate,
Oh, okay.
item.
On the
So-
desktop.
On the
PDF?
desktop. It's a figure. So the main item at the last MGA meeting, the Mid-County Groundwater Agency meeting, was the memo on the groundwater sustainability plan. That's basically, it outlined the 2-year process to create an engagement form to track the public and complete the report. So there's an application that actually went online today, thank you, inviting community members to apply for the MGA Groundwater Sustainability Advisory Committee. So, and there are also a couple applications at the back of the room if anybody's interested. The committee is looking for 13 community members that are interested in helping provide input to the groundwater sustainability plan. It'll probably require, we're estimating about 8 hours per month of commitment, maybe more, maybe less. And the applications are due 4 p.m. Thursday, July 20th. And if you want to know more, there's a meeting on June 20th at the Congressional Church of Soquel, the one with the white steeple, June 29th from 7 to 9 p.m. It'll focus on that, what a groundwater sustainability plan is. And, if you have questions at that time, it'd be pertinent to ask, grant opportunity. So really looking forward to getting community involvement on that. I don't know if you want to add any, Director LaHue, okay,
No,
to that.
We're good.
And then the other thing was that we've brought up a couple times, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, we had the Danish ambassador come and talk to us about some innovative method. They have used geophysical method to potentially detect the seawater interface in the aquifer offshore. So, to that point, it was said that it couldn't be done. We convened a committee to review the data, and some of the top people said that it looks like it is feasible. So the MGA, the Mid-County Groundwater Agency, said they were willing to fund it, and take the risk that it could work. And so what you see up on the screen is about a week or two ago, they flew the area offshore. What you're seeing is a map there of Capitola, right where the cursor is, all the way down to La Selva Beach. Those blue lines parallel to shore are the flight lines by the helicopter towing the geophysical device. And then we also ran some perpendicular lines, perpendicular to shore, some onshore and then some a little bit further offshore, just in case those horizontal lines didn't detect the seawater interface. We went further out. So the good news is every night they came back from the helicopter, they sent the information back to Denmark to QA/QC the data, and the person there at that time said everything looks perfect, very much in line with their expectations. What you see in the upper right is what's called a decay curve. It was what they were hoping for. So it'll take them another month or two, a couple months to analyze the data, but thus far the tool performed as we had hoped. So we still have another couple hurdles to go, but good news thus far. And I applaud our board and the MGA for taking the step, because it was thought it couldn't be done, but it looks like it might help us solve a little bit of part of the riddle. And that's all I have on
Okay.
that item.
Any questions on that one? Okay. Next is on the Water Rates Advisory Committee.
So the Water Rates Advisory Committee met for the very first kickoff meeting on May 19th at the district offices at 4 o'clock. And Director Christensen was able to attend. We had a number of staff members that were able to be present. The board members that are on the committee are Director Daniels and Director Christensen. We had 10 of our 11 community members that were able to attend the meeting. So one of the things we discovered is that that meeting space probably is not going to be sufficient to meet our needs. We were packed in there pretty tightly. But we had introductions, a pretty lively discussion about what drew everyone to participate in the committee. I showed a brief video on how water rates are set and kind of that conundrum between fixed and variable costs that was put out by the Water Research Foundation, just to give everybody kind of a framework of what we were dealing with. So some of the things that came out of that meeting was a request that we move the meeting venue off-site to a larger facility. So I'm looking at the Community Foundation to see if there might be something there available to us. They would like the meetings expanded from a 60-minute meeting to a 90-minute meeting if possible, so that we can get all of the input that they're eager to provide. They envisioned that maybe the meetings would be twice a month to start, just as we get up to speed, get everybody up to speed and really dig into the rate structure and some of our alternatives. And they would like a set day and time for the meetings so that everybody can coordinate their calendars. But it received a lot of appreciative response from the community. It was good participation.
I just want to thank everyone for being open to having such a large committee, and I think it's great that we have community members willing to put in that time. I think it's fabulous.
Fantastic.
So, and thank you both for doing that. Great. All right. So on to administrative business. So no will serve letters. So the next item is our update regarding Deepwater Desal project. Welcome.
And Kim, I was going to give a quick overview.
Sure.
So we're appreciative to have the general manager at Deepwater Desal, Kim Adamson, with us tonight. Thank you for coming and give us a update on the desalination project. I want to set it into context a little bit, though, what Kim's going to talk about tonight, and that's the diagram up on the screen here, is Kim's going to talk about one of the potential supply options that the Water District is pursuing and its overall strategy to reach sustainability. So the diagram up there on the screen shows, that's all right, the equation, if you would, the simplified equation. And I'll start on the right. The far right is the desal symbol. So that's one of the supply options that the district's considering and seeing how the project moves along. The one in the middle is a river transfer with the city of Santa Cruz. They're pursuing that, evaluating it, and so we're watching them and cooperating with them. And the third option there is our pure water Soquel option, which is taking treated water, purifying it, and replenishing the groundwater basin to prevent seawater intrusion. There's a fourth option that's not shown on there, and that's stormwater recharge. It's the new kid on the block, and so we'll be revising this diagram. We'll hear a little bit about that later tonight. Besides those four supply options that the district's considering, it could be one combination of, we'll see as we move forward how the landscape looks, but also further to the left is well management. So we're moving wells inland, we're modifying the way we pump them to minimize further seawater intrusion. And far to the left is what our customers do for us, and that is our insurance policy. They've been conserving water like crazy out there and are probably what prevented seawater intrusion from occurring thus far. So just in summary, that's our simplified equation to reach sustainability in context, and Kim will talk about the desalination part tonight. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for having me here tonight to give you an update on Deepwater Desal. I was here about a year ago, and it's been a very busy year since I've last talked to you. I did provide some material for you that I'm not going to show tonight. I recently, I think it was about 2 months ago, I did an update for the Monterey Peninsula Mayors Group, and they had some specific questions they wanted answered, and because they covered a lot of the areas that the off-takers are interested in, I provided those questions to you as well for your information. I've also included, which is not in my presentation, a list of the various reports and studies that we've had to do for our EIR and EIS and permitting process. And what you can see from that list, I'm not sure if it's printed in color, but the items that are highlighted in yellow are complete, and there are very few studies or efforts that we have left to do to finish up our EIR, EIS. So that's just to kind of give you an idea of what kind of progress we're making. So this just gives you a brief overview of where we have settled for the proposed project. 110 acres of property that used to be the East Tank Farm for Dynegy's power plant. We have a 25,000 acre-foot seawater reverse osmosis plant proposed there, co-located with a 150 megawatt data center that is seawater cooled. Pipelines, intake and outfall pipelines are 100% redundant, and our intake is at about 130-foot depth in the head of the canyon, in one of the center trenches, so it's a little bit safer from the sand movement that you have that's pretty heavy in the canyon in that area. Our discharge is further to the north up on the plain, and it is about 50 feet depth. This is just the architectural rendering of what our campus will look like when it's completed. This was put together by Black & Veatch. They did the majority of our owner's engineer work for a 10% design for the EIR, EIS. You'll see that there is the SWRO plant. It is further to the east. The data centers are the 3 buildings to the west, and actually a concrete pad for modular data center cooling units. And then there's also a very substantial 200 megawatt substation. We'll be able to connect in and back out again to the PG&E transmission lines that run across the property. So we'll have redundant pathways into the substation.
Can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Back on the other one, was there a reason for the brine discharge being placed where it is, at 50, at a lesser depth than in that location?
Our consultant is Scott Jenkins from Scripps, and Scott put together a model of the entire area that we were looking at, and he modeled all of our brine distribution, and he identified that as the prime location. There's one other reason that it's out as far as it is, and that is because it puts it in state lands jurisdiction rather than the harbor district. And we wanted state lands to do our EIR rather than the harbor district because they have more resources.
Okay, thanks.
I know you've seen this graphic before, but some in the audience may not have seen it. We believe the project has some real efficiencies because we're able to use the seawater that's coming in. It's coming in from deep in the canyon, so it's very clean and takes less pretreatment, which saves power. But because it's so cold, it actually increases pumping power to go through the reverse osmosis filtration system. So what we do is we looked for something that we can get some free heating. And one of the places that we see a need is data centers. Santa Clara has, at this point, where data centers are what they do, they only have 3 megawatts of data center space available currently, and it's not contiguous. It's not in the same building. So there is a real need for data center space. There's also a real need for clean, powered and cooled data centers.
One question? The power facility there, is that your own facility in addition to the PG&E you mentioned, or is that PG&E?
In this case, that power facility is Moss Landing Power Plant, and this may be how we do this, or it may be we transmit wholesale power purchased from Shell Energy over PG&E's lines to our facility. But what this is showing is actually getting it over the fence from Moss Landing Power Plant if they stay in operation, and installing carbon capture onto their facility so we have a green source of power right next door.
And then if their power plant's down, you'd use the PG&E facilities wherever
Yes.
they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
For one of the first things we started with when we started this project is looking at the impacts on marine biology. And so the company went out, this was before I was here, but they went out over a period of 18 months. We collected from that a year's worth of data that was taken morning and night that compared various locations. And basically, we took samples, counted all the plankton in the samples, identified them. And what we found through that process is that there are 70% less larval fish per cubic meter at the 130-foot depth where our intake is. But even more important than that is the size of those larva fish. They have head capsules that are large enough that they cannot fit into our 1 millimeter screen. So even though they're there in the sample, they're not able to be taken in through our intake. So we've greatly minimized our impacts. Tenera, who is our marine biology consultants, we've been going through all of the studies with them. They have determined that our impact is not significant, although that's not the EIR. The EIR has not drawn that conclusion yet, but we're working on that. And we're working currently with the Coastal Commission on those calculations and those studies. So one of the questions most people have is with the Ocean Plan Amendment, how do we satisfy the requirement for subsurface intakes? And we have undertaken a subsurface intake study that is being handled by Derek Williams. They have looked at the areas that we have met with the State Water Resources Control Board, and they've asked us to look at. One of the main areas being Potrero Road, and that is actually the Salinas River State Beach. Most of what you see there is a slant well field. It would take 30 slant wells for us to try to bring in water there. We'd only get 79% of what we needed, and 22% of that would be groundwater coming out of the Salinas Basin, which is a critically overdrafted basin. On top of that, that's 1.1 miles of the beach with a 16-foot road on it, and where that road and where the slant wells are located, that's actually a preserve. It's not just state beach, it's a preserve that they don't want us working in. So that site is going to become unfeasible as soon as State Parks issues their letter and says, no, you can't do this, which we're working with them on. We have not found any other locations that come anywhere close to this location as far as being able to supply water. So we have been in coordination with the State Water Resources Control Board. They have blessed all the things that we've looked at, and so we expect, as soon as Derek wraps up his report in August, we expect to apply for our subsurface feasibility determination. Determination of need is one of the things that we have to show for our permitting application. None of this is going to be new information to the board, but we are looking at this as a regional plant, and there are several things that are driving the need in this area. We have no imported water. The passage of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, we have several basins on the Monterey Bay area, in the Monterey Bay region that fall under that act, and we also have Pajaro, which doesn't fall under the act, but is also critically overdrafted. We also have mandated surface water cutbacks. The Salinas River is under a court-ordered cutback, or the Carmel River, under a court-ordered cutback of 9,000 acre-feet. The San Lorenzo is going to be under a mandated cutback when they finally finalize their fish habitat conservation plan. And so if you look at just the basins that fall under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the mandatory surface water cutbacks, and I've only calculated 5% of a cutback for the San Lorenzo, and according to Rosemary, it's going to be likely higher than that. But we're looking at a deficit in the Monterey Bay area of 46,700 acre-feet per year. That's how much we have to reduce taking from our current sources. Our plant is 25,000 acre feet, and there's a proposed plant to the south of us for 6,000 acre feet, and there's 4,000 acre feet of recycled water down there. We still haven't made it back to neutral and sustainable water supply. I'm not going to spend any time on this because you guys have seen this lots of times, so you know what it is. This is our list of off-takers. I don't remember when I was here last if Pajaro Sunny Mesa was on the list, but they are on the list now. They have signed in and would like 1,000 acre feet for their system.
Do you have a determination of what you think the minimum would be to build the plant? Like, you know, if it was us and the other two small ones, so about 4,000, would you build a desal plant, or would it require one of the two biggies or both biggies, or?
We would require Salinas to be part of that, and because they're such a major part of the project in and of itself, and it's Salinas and Cal Water. It's a three-way agreement because Cal Water supplies Salinas, and their need is very large. Their minimum stated need is what we have here. They actually could use another 10,000 acre feet, and in addition to that, we have been approached by agencies that would like to get our water outside of the Monterey Bay area and get it to water banks. We have not followed with that because we think that we want this to be a regional plant, but there's a need that can definitely be met here.
On the other end, if Salinas gets their 15 that they're listed here for, and the Peninsula gets their 9,000 that they're listed for, that's 24. And you're talking about 25,000, so is that 25,000 the tops, or?
So it's what we're applying for right now.
Right.
And let me touch back on the Peninsula. We are the fallback project for the
Sure.
Peninsula.
Sure.
If CalAm, something happens and they don't move forward, if when they certify their EIR, they get sued by Marina, then they would come to us. But our project, because we're putting in 100% redundant intake and outfalls, at some point in the future could be increased, and we have the space as well on the plant site, could be increased to 50,000 acre feet.
Okay,
But we are not planning that. It's not a phased project right now.
thanks.
The partnership structure that we are working with right now is we're moving forward and talking, we're interviewing numerous different engineering, procurement, and construction partners. And what we're looking at is a design, build, own, operate, transfer model where we fund the project, we build it, we own it for a period of 30 years, which is the debt repayment period. And at the end of that repayment period, we transfer it to the off-takers. The reason being that the capital expense of building the plant is included in the cost of water. And so you're basically buying the plant over time without interest tacked on. Well, with our interest tacked on. We are looking at the off-taker being either a JPA, which is the group of off-takers, or a wholesaler. We have a wholesaler thrown in there because Cal Water is the largest off-taker and they can't be a voting member of a JPA, and so they may rather go that route. We don't know that yet. We're probably 6 to 8 months away from starting to figure out exactly who the off-taker is going to be. We will have a large partner that helps with the engineering, procurement, and construction, and provides the operation and maintenance of the plant for the period that, that we own the plant before the transfer. So this is the interesting part of the project. One of the things that keeps our operating costs low is the cost of power. And power, as a private entity, we're not able to buy it wholesale. But the city of Salinas is able and has the ability in their city charter to form a municipal power agency. They have agreed to form that power agency and purchase power from the wholesale market. We have gone out, we've talked with Shell Energy, and we've gotten today's rates. If we're to sign on the dotted line today, we can get a contract for 200 megawatts of power for 20 years for 6 cents. And that includes all of our transmission tariffs and everything. That's all in. It includes all our ISO costs and everything. So to the end user, it would be 6 cents per kilowatt hour. The rate that you would get, that we would pay PG&E if we went just straight with PG&E, would be anywhere from 13 cents to 15 cents, depending on time of year. So we've reduced the cost of power almost 50% on the project. That reduction is passed on to the SWRO plant, who in turn, that reduction is included in the cost of water, which is passed on to the off-takers, who are the citizens of the city of Salinas. So it's a really great public-private partnership.
Could you define the off-taker?
We'll take.
I'm very sorry. Yeah, I can. Off-takers are the agencies who would purchase the water.
Thank you.
Schedule, budget, and milestone. This schedule is not up to date because we just received new numbers from the lead agencies. And because we've made a couple changes in our EIR, we made the decision to hold off and roll our subsurface feasibility study into our EIR. That has pushed out our EIR publication. So our draft is supposed to be published rather than September of this year, in January of next year. And included in that draft will be our subsurface feasibility study, an additional study that they've asked us to do where we're sending out an ROV and we're taking benthic samples right now and doing a benthic study, and some submarine geological information as well. This schedule puts us at start of construction for March of 2020, and you can shift that out about 5 months based on what we just found out from the lead agencies. We do think that we are going to be fairly streamlined from the conclusion of our EIR certification, because we are currently undergoing our staff reviews by the Coastal Commission of all of our marine work right now. We had on Friday a conference call with Tom Lester and Pete Ramonde, who are doing the reviews of our work, went through all of the information. They're not asking for any more studies, although they are asking us to calculate some things a little bit differently. But because we're able to do that review as part of the EIR process, by the time our EIR is certified, we will have taken care of everything they want us to do, and it'll be basically an administrative activity to go get the permit from that point forward. We will also already have our subsurface feasibility determination from the State Water Resources Control Board, so everything else should fall into place fairly quickly. On the permitting side, one other item that takes quite a bit of time is we had to do a focus study for red-legged or Santa Cruz long-toed salamanders. And we just finished that this week, and yay, no salamanders. So that was an hour or a year and a half long study. And so we're good to go there.
What was the study area?
It was our plant site. It was 2 pieces of property next to our plant site and a piece of property behind us down by the slough. So. So that's pretty much my update. I would be happy to answer any questions for you on the project and on where we are right now.
So what do you see as like the big things that could get in the way of this happening or delaying it significantly?
Of course, lawsuits. Once the EIR is certified, you're guaranteed to have lawsuits whether they have merit or not. We're doing everything we can to make sure that we have everything covered so there is no ground for lawsuits. That would be the big one. We're far enough into our subsurface feasibility to see that it just isn't feasible for our plant. And the ocean plan amendment does allow for screened ocean intake should subsurface not be feasible. So While the Ocean Plan Amendment threw some requirements at us, it actually was a good thing because it documented the steps we have to take to get through this process. And I think the process is a much better process now than it was when Carlsbad was trying to go through this. And there were, no goalposts to speak of, and when there were, they moved. So I think really just the biggie is what happens with lawsuits. Okay. And a lot of that's up to us and how well we do on our work.
And so the having Salinas as a partner is not a worry.
No,
Okay.
no. Having Salinas
they're
as a
into it.
partner is not a worry. And they're not, they're an off-taker, but they're not a partner we're relying on for funding. And that's one of the reasons, one of the benefits to the deboot process is they don't have to tie up their bonding capacity. They can pay for the plant over a period of time, and we don't have to worry about what their credit rates are because we will have commercial grade credit.
Good question. Right.
Well, I was looking at page 3 of 5 of the update, and it mentions water available to end users in 2022. And I wonder why that's a little different than the schedule there that you were talking about.
Because 320 is the start of construction.
Oh, okay, right,
So we have a 2-year construction window.
okay, got it.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, yeah, it's just, are you able to refine the cost? You had in the addendum, the update, you had a fairly wide range in the cost of water there.
Yeah, 2,000 to 2,500, I think, is where we were then.
Yeah.
The reason we have a wide range is because right now we're at a 10 to 15% design, which means we have about a 30% plus or minus. We can't do anything about that until we do more design. But what we do know is that that is a very conservative number. So right now we're right in the middle of that. The other piece of that is that the data center, as we have actually, I have a couple extra slides I might show you if you're interested in it. We've looked at how much money the data center is going to save in power and how much they can pay for cooling, and there's a chunk of money that will come back to the water side to lower that cost of water. And the reason is because the numbers that I'm providing you are 100%, all of the infrastructure is 100% burdened on the water cost. Because I know that as a board, that's what you want to know. You can't assume that there's going to be a reduction. But there may be a reduction, can be a reduction of up to 1,000 acre feet, $1,000 per acre foot. So, and could we pull up those slides? It says data center economic.
Yep, Ron found it, thanks.
One of the questions I get asked a lot is, what if there's no data center? And can you switch to the next one, please? And what I recently did is I did a model of the cooling costs of the same exact size data center built in Santa Clara to our data center, using traditional cooling for the data center built in Santa Clara, and the water that's needed for traditional cooling. And you'll see that there's a huge savings in seawater cooling versus traditional cooling. And I can't even really read the numbers, but I think it's 198 million to 117, something like that. So there's definitely a reason we're not going to have any problem getting a data center to come on board for this. And then the next slide is also of interest. And the other thing about it is this is the water used in a traditionally cooled data center versus ours. Ours, we have about 500,000 gallons per year, and that's basically maintenance water. It's over 1 billion gallons per year to cool, of water, domestic water, for the cooling system for a 150 megawatt data center. And at Santa Clara rates, that's very expensive because they're $450 a unit. So, so the data center is going to bring money to this project that will help defray the cost of water on the agency side.
Yeah, the other question I had was, with Salinas, you working so closely with Salinas, are they committed then to the 10,000 acre feet per year?
We have we have a three-way agreement between Salinas and Cal Water, and Cal Water is actually right now drafting their take agreement, basically. We're starting to negotiate that actual agreement at this point with them. But we have a memorandum of understanding, just like we have with this board and all the other boards.
Because it sounds like that, if that went through, it would be a go regardless of smaller users.
Yeah, and they've basically said if we can build it, they'll take it. So we're just working on getting that drafted. One other thing I will share with you is that, and I know that Soquel Creek did as well, but we submitted for WFIA funds for this project. So we are one of the 45 projects, I think, that submitted for funds. So we'll see how that goes, and we should hear in July.
I'm going to invite the public if they have any questions or
Comments?
comments.
I do. Becky Steinbrenner, thank you for this great presentation. Thank you. I've been curious about how it was coming along. I have some questions, and I don't know if you want me just to list the questions, and then you can answer them all, or if you want me to do
That's-
one by one.
That's probably the best way.
Okay. So I remember that there, or maybe I've heard this on the news somehow, that there was tied with this a large solar power farm down in the Piscinas Valley. So I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit and what the I understand you're working with the Salinas of City of Salinas, and they can buy wholesale power. I'm also aware that Monterey County, Santa Clara County, San Benito County, and Santa Cruz County are all working on this joint power project. So I'd like to know how this is going to fit in with that and those plans. I'm also curious about the route to the sea and how that would disrupt or not disrupt the roadways. I seem to remember from earlier presentations that there would be minimal disturbance, but I'd like to know about that. And finally, about the impacts, future impacts of potential sea level rises, if that's being taken into account in your modeling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's see.
I wrote them down.
Pardon? You did? Okay.
First one was solar farm.
Solar farm. So yes, there was an agreement with the solar farm that basically it was a letter of interest between us and them. So we do have communication with them, and we have that as an option for our power. If we buy wholesale power from Shell Energy, though, we can pick our mix, and we can say we want 100% green, we can say we want 50% wind, 50 solar. So that's the path we'll be going forward, and data centers are pretty particular on their mix of power. They want very green power. So that's the answer to that one.
Next one was any connection with the municipal power,
CCA.
regional power.
Yeah, we have met with the representatives of the CCA, the Community Choice Aggregate, and they expect their power rates. They don't have their power rates set yet. They'll have them set this summer, but they expect their power rates to be about the same as PG&E power rates. So
Can you speak into the microphone?
Yeah,
and
sure.
that's the board, so everybody can hear.
Sure. They expect them to be about the same as the PG&E power rates. And so we wouldn't save as much money if we go through CCA, but we have opened that conversation and said if this is something, this 200 megawatt base load of power is something that can help you, maybe there's some way we can work together. So that conversation is taking place.
Then there was the effect on the roadways.
Let me go back to, can we
To the map.
screen? Yeah. Okay, so the green lines are the intake and outfalls that are being installed via horizontal directional drilling. And we start that installation back on Dolan Road, where we dig a pit. It's not actually on the road, it's off on Dynegy property at the end of the rail line. We dig a large pit there for receiving the pipeline, and then we install the pipeline from out in the water and pull it back. And at the point that we cross under Highway 1 and under the harbor, we're at about 150 to 200 feet in depth. So there's no, there will be no road closures and no disturbance to traffic.
And the last question was impacts of sea level rise.
Okay, so impacts on sea level rise, one of the things that we have had to do is identify whether or not the plant will be in the new 100-year floodplain for sea level rise. We have those estimates, and it is one of the few areas that's actually high and dry. The data center might get a little bit wet, but not too much. It's actually the parking area. But if you look at those maps, the SWRO plant is out of the 100-year floodplain with a 5-foot rise.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that has questions or comments on this item?
Often when something sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. I have a number of questions here, and I took notes on the presentation, and I'm always quite amazed how these presentations sound so glorious. I recall a few years ago people voted down a desal plant, as I recall. By what authority is this whole thing proceeding? That's one question. Another question is data for what? Why are we having all these data centers all over? What kind of data is being collected? For what purposes? There appears to be an assumption that we just have to have more and more and more data collected and then facilitating that with our county resources and taxpayer money. So questions on what specifically is all this data. The presenter spoke often of we. Who is we? Define we. And then when you brought up, will the plant be affected by sea level rise? This is a global problem with sea level rise and coastal areas being inundated and islands disappearing. It seems to me that is a critical question that might just say, wait a minute, this does not make sense at all. So that's on sea level rise. And then the last, well, she said 22% of groundwater would be required. We're trying to not diminish the groundwater. This sounds like disastrous. We should not be taking out groundwater for dubious purposes. And then the last question, I recall maybe 10 years ago in Felton, Cal-Am owned the water and the citizens bought it. Is this water privatization that's taking place? That's the last question. Please respond. Thank you.
I'll take a couple of those right off the bat and save Ms. Adamson on those. So she had said this is a private enterprise at this point that will then be turned over to the public after 30 years. That's the idea. Who is we? That is Deepwater Desal, which is the project, the company, the people that are funding and coming up with this idea. And so I don't know what to say about by what authority. I mean, they're going through all of the normal channels of getting the appropriate coastal permits and running and doing an environmental impact study. So, that's just through all of the public authorities that control that.
I think even a private citizen could build their own desal
Right.
plant if they went through all that.
So I guess I'm not sure how to answer your question about why data centers. I mean, data centers are used for everybody that has a phone, a computer, anything that's stored anywhere. So this is not some data collection thing. This is just another kind of a cog in the internet wheel that we all rely on. And I think that answers your questions.
There was one other.
Yes, Bob.
Our first question was a statement that a measure had been passed banning desal plants. The only measure that I'm aware of is one in Santa Cruz, the city of Santa Cruz only, which did not ban desal plants. It required a public vote in the city of Santa Cruz in the event they wanted to construct a desal plant. That was the only issue on the ballot.
Yeah, and this.
And there was another question too about the use of groundwater, and that was from the beach production wells, and they're hoping that they don't have to build the beach wells because they want to use these open intakes.
They don't want to use the beach wells. Basically, those were pretty close to fatal flaws for surface intake, ocean water intake. So, all right, anybody else have any questions or comments on this item?
I was the victim of an illegal alien hitting me at 75 miles per hour negligently in the back of my car. As progressive and liberal as I am on most things, I'm now in favor of building the wall. Anyway, on the desal, I won't bother to flip into all the pages. Number one, you're bringing desal back, and you're not even evaluating the Lockefer system that Jerry Paul has made available to you generously for 4 years. You have done no evaluation. I was told by staff and a couple of board members long ago, years ago, oh yes, we'll evaluate Lockefer, and we'll put $50,000 or so into a study to make sure it's efficiently done and monitor it. You haven't done any of that. That is a violation of your sworn duties to provide for efficient management for each and every one of you.
Excuse me, can you just tone it down, please?
That you have failed to evaluate Lockefer with any fairness, impartiality, or whatsoever is an absolute disgrace to the integrity of this board.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We have said multiple times that project is only through the city of Santa Cruz.
No.
The city of Santa Cruz.
You could have evaluated it, and you haven't even contacted the city to discuss it.
We have.
We have.
Rosemary was here
She was just
a
here
month
last
ago.
meeting.
We asked her about it.
So anyway, so that's it.
You could have done an evaluation, you could have supported the effort, and you failed to do that. You could have done an independent study. The same way the taxpayers and ratepayers are going to be ripped off by the Santa Cruz City and the joint desal plant.
If we funded a study, spent $1 million studying it without any buy-in from the city and ended up not building it, you would be in here complaining about the wasted money.
Spending money on something we had no control of.
Lockefer, the first word there, lock, that is because
This
it
should not
uses
take my time.
We'll put you back. It uses the Lockefer, the Loch Lomond, and that is owned and operated by the cities. And so if we can't get access to Loch Lomond, that whole plan is down the toilet.
You could have challenged the city's bad, parochial, or worse judgment, and you failed to do that.
You go ahead and finish.
Okay, and you should have done that. Instead, you're suggesting to waste $100 million on your poop to some kind water, taking Santa Cruz poop and putting that in the Lockefer, in our own aquifers, rather. When you have this alternative, you could have evaluated, you could have constructively approached the city and the city council. You also could have sought the assistance of the California Water Department and Water Commission. It's just I've seen big government stuff work. I've seen complexities. I've seen narrow constituencies. And I also have reason to suspect highly why you guys and girls want to suggest $143 million, which could grow to $200 million, and put that on the backs of all of your ratepayers, each and every one. Another example of the county government in this county demonstrating that people in government can waste other people's money ever so easily. One recent example is the Soquel bond issue for $310 million on paper that was going to cost every property owner in the county, in the region, $634 million in the aggregate to pay back. I happened to catch that coincidentally at a Cabrillo College board meeting. I stood up and asked for more information. Two other folks joined me. We hit them with public records requests.
Thank you.
They
Time's
didn't
up.
need a dime of it, and it
Time's up.
failed.
Excuse
It
me.
was a fraud, the same way the waste I
Your
see
time
on
is
this
up,
plant
sir.
is a fraud.
Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board on this item? All right. Seeing none, then we'll
President
move on to the next item.
President LaHue, may I make
Yes.
a comment?
Yeah.
I just want to note, as the board asked City of Santa Cruz staff, and as the city council asked their own staff to look at the aquifer, they do have on the June 13th city council member a response point by point to Jerry Paul's 8 points that he made. So that'll be public record on that agenda.
Good.
And I think the bottom line is they're not building that.
Right. So the next item is the draft budget. So I expect Leslie's going to present this.
Yeah, I want to do a little intro here. I can't but not do this before Leslie runs through the budget. You know, I just want to express my appreciation and gratitude for her and Ryan's hard work on this, what I'd call a mini masterpiece. You know, you think about it, over the last 2 years, they've taken our budgets from a spreadsheet to a comprehensive strategic guiding document that, you know, better serves our organization, certainly, and the community. Not to mention that you're a pretty amazing photographer. I think you took probably every picture in that thing.
Oh, they're
Okay.
beautiful.
Yeah, they are. It's quite an eye. And, you know, when she submitted the budget on last Friday, I was actually going to take a picture and just post it here just in recognition of her. But since she had been up past 3 a.m. that night and the 2 nights before that, I thought I would save that. But thank you for your and your Ryan's genuine big effort on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron. So I'm bringing the draft budget back to you. We had our budget board workshop on May 16th, so you've seen a lot of the details up to this point. So I'm just going to kind of quickly recap some of the big issue items and some of the changes that are incorporated in the draft budget since we had the budget workshop. So for those who don't want to read a 190-page budget document, the transmittal letter really serves as kind of a budget at a glance. It will really give you kind of the overview of our strategic goals and what the district is attempting to accomplish. It gives us the budget highlights kind of broken out by those goals. And it also points out any notable trends and changes in the budget year over year and the sources and uses of funds. So that would be your go-to piece if you want a synopsis. The sources of funds, and I just want to point this out real quickly, after looking through the transmittal document, it doesn't look as though my graphs got updated for the sources and uses of funds, so I will be updating those in the final budget document. They're actually in the transmittal letter right now. The sources of funds are being shown at $29.1 million, and it's actually $29.5 million. And what that is those are the funds that we have available to work with for the 17-18 budget year. And in 16-17, we started with a reserve of about $35.3 million in the sources of funds we had to work with. And the difference of that $5.8 million is primarily due to the utilization of the COP funds on projects throughout the year that are no longer available to us in the subsequent budget year. So those sources of funds include all of our water sales of $10.3 million, and we're anticipating that Those Stage 3 emergency rates will remain in place through at least April 2018, and that we'll reevaluate that after the water year. And it's based on actual consumption from February of 2016 to January of 2017. And so that's actually about a 1.6% decrease over the budgeted consumption in 16-17, because we really haven't seen water use rebounding. The service charges are about $6.5 million in revenue. Then we do have 2 grants that we've received. We have the $150,000 Water Smart Title 16 feasibility grant for the Pure Water Soquel project, and the Recycled Water Facilities planning grant of $75,000. We've also got a grant contingency in the budget that I added in this final document that allows for a $1 million Proposition 1 groundwater quality grant. And if we were to be awarded that, we haven't been awarded it yet, but if we were to be awarded that, there would be some additional costs that I've outlined on that spreadsheet for grant contingency that would have to be escalated in order to take advantage of those grant proceeds. So I wanted to make sure to get that in there so that if we were to be awarded the grant, we could go ahead and proceed with those tasks that we needed to undertake to take advantage of the grant. The uses of funds is where we're spending our money for the year, and for 2017-18, we're looking at about $22.8 million. There again, the transmittal letter is showing that as $22 million, so I will update the graph. The fiscal year 2016-17 was at about $29.4 million. So that difference of $6.6 million there is primarily due to reductions in our CIP spending. We haven't allocated nearly as much in CIP spending this year as we did in the prior year. Part of that's because, again, we've spent down those COP funds. They're not available to us any longer. So our personnel costs are at about $7.1 million. That's an increase of about 8.22% over the prior year. Our benefit costs are at $1.9 million. That's about a 32% increase over the prior year, and the reason that increase was so large is because we're rolling in some of that unfunded actuarial liability that has to be paid down on the CalPERS pension benefits. And then retiree health is in there at $700,000. So you can see that personnel costs are the large majority of our operating expenses. The operating expenses net of personnel costs are coming in at about $3.7 million. In addition to operating expenses, we also have a number of operating projects. We're looking at spending about $2.9 million on those projects, and a lot of those are the feasibility studies that we're undertaking for our various community water plan projects, as well as the Santa Cruz Mid-County Groundwater Agency contribution. We also have our capital improvement project budget at $6.1 million. About $1.4 million of that is PAYGO funding, and then we've got $510,000 in water capacity funding that we were going to use last year, and we didn't actually utilize it, so those projects have rolled over to this year. And then we've got the COP funding of $4.2 million. Now, one of the things we did in this final, or the draft budget I'm bringing back to you tonight, is we removed the hexavalent chromium treatment plant project and substituted in the Soquel Drive main replacement project for the COP funding. So our staffing is projected increase from 43.5 to 45.8 FTE. And that's going to cost us, all of these staffing changes or staffing increases, including the reclassifications and the benefits associated with them, are going to cost us about an extra $268,000. But the increase is for a public outreach coordinator that's going to be taking some additional hours, moving from a half-time to a 0.8 FTE. And then we've added a 0.5 FTE engineering tech support to special projects under the administration department, as well as to engineering, the engineering department. That will be one position, but their time will be split half and half between the two functions. Then we have a 1.0 FTE temporary assistant engineer to assist with special projects as well. The reclassifications are to relocate a half-time FTE from conservation outreach into administration outreach to consolidate those efforts. And then we have a reclassification of the special projects associate manager position to a manager position. The changes that are in the document since the budget workshop are the hexavalent chromium treatment plant replacement with the Soquel Drive main replacement for the COP funding. And then the funding for the TCP treatment project was actually expected to be all done in fiscal year 17-18, but they looked at the timeline for that project and realized that they weren't going to be able to get it all done in the single year. So it was actually split equally between the 2 years, with $720,000 in each year, fiscal 17-18 and fiscal year 18-19. The Clubhouse Drive main replacement project, we expected actually that to start a little bit earlier. We thought we would be getting underway with that in May, which meant we would be expending some funds in 16-17. But what's happened is that one's actually been delayed slightly as well, so we don't expect to expend the funds on that probably till next fiscal year. So we place the full balance of that project in next fiscal year. We updated personnel benefits about $30,000 with some changes in some benefit plan elections by some staff that have happened in the last few weeks. Then we have 2 new policies that have been included in the draft budget for consideration. The draft budget includes those policies, but if the board chooses not to adopt those policies, they'll be removed from the final document. Then the $150,000 Title 16 feasibility study grant is now in the budget document that wasn't available. We didn't realize we'd have been awarded that when we met for the budget workshop. So we added an additional $12,000 in outreach costs as a result of that grant award. So the impacts on reserves, at the budget workshop, we had anticipated our debt coverage ratio to come in at about 1.85, and with the changes we've made to the budget draft document, it's coming in at about 1.9. So that's improved slightly. Beginning reserve levels changed from 9.8 million to 11.3 million, and what caused that change is the main replacement project replacing the hex chrome project, because less funds are now being held over to 18-19 as a result of that. So we'll be using more of the COP funds this year than we had anticipated. And that leaves our ending reserve for 17-18 at about 6.7 million, which is an improvement over the prior year as well. So before I publish a final document, some of the changes I'm going to make to this draft document that has been brought before you tonight is we'll make a decision on the pending debt management policy and capital facilities reserve policy. Yay or nay on those will depend whether or not I leave them in there or take them out. I'll update those graphs for the sources and uses of funds that are in the transmittal letter. We're going to update the summary of expenses by department spreadsheet to reflect 2.886 million or 2.9 million in operating projects, because there'd been a typo that I discovered after the draft document was already put in the board packet. And one of the things that the Government Finance Officers Association recommended that we do in our budget document was to capture the future operating expenditures of any capital projects. So the impact on our operating budget once that capital asset was completed and placed into service. We don't have a whole lot of projects that would create that operating expenditure right now, but there are a few. So I'll work with engineering and special projects to identify what those might be and get those added to the document as well. And then there's just some little cosmetic changes to clean up some typos and cut off sentences and stuff. Those are the only changes that were made between this document and what would be a final budget document.
I mean, who knows, replacing Clubhouse Drive might decrease our operating expenses.
It very well could, yeah. So that's it for the budget presentation. So I think the motion before you is to provide feedback on the final budget document, whether you want to make further revisions or have further questions about the document, or whether you want to adopt it pending the changes that I've brought to you tonight and just go ahead and adopt it at this meeting rather than bringing it back on June 20th.
All right.
Well, I had one, I don't know whether it was a typo or what, on page 99 of the packet.
Okay.
It's the draft revenue expense trend analysis, 2009. And it was, I think that there's a line missing.
Take a look at that real quick.
I think it's operating revenue.
Oh, perfect. You know what it is there's not a line missing. It actually is underneath the red line because they so closely align.
Oh, okay.
That's the problem, is
That's where I thought it might
the
be.
two of them are
but-
tracking so close that they're almost overlaying each other, and it doesn't look like one of them's represented.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that's a good eye. Yeah.
Well, because also the colors of two of them were, and then it went,
Very
oh,
similar.
well, so the two blues. I thought, am I looking at the wrong blue? But then the data didn't go conform to the blue line that was there, so it was, I was messed up.
Okay. I can take another look at that.
Well, I was just think maybe just make the red line thinner and add the other thickness for the blue there, so it, or asterisk it and something like that.
Okay.
And then I just had some other questions about just a couple of line items are and I assume that these are all discussed on among
Page?
staff. One was on page 98, the arborist evaluation.
Okay, is that on the schedule of unfunded projects?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And so that's what that was.
Yeah, these are the list of projects that have not been selected for funding, but we have placed them in the budget document because we have that ability to move them up to funded status and bring it back to the board and let you know what we've done. So yes, if you've got any questions on any of these projects, it would be a good idea to ask them now. The arborist evaluation, I believe, is risk mitigation, to have an arborist take a look at some of the trees around some of our facilities, our tank sites and whatnot,
I read about that.
and make sure that we don't risk property damage by trees that are likely to fall.
So the main one I had was actually because the no-des machine was being used for the Chrome 6. Is that still the case now? That it's still being used that way?
It's
No,
being used in...
Taken off that, so I was just wondering, so it's going to go back on the schedule of main flushing?
Yes.
It is. And then, so then I was wondering if there was an expense, we could have a list of the expense of the filter expense, because I was just talking, when they were operating in my neighborhood, they were talking, they were very worried about the cost of the filters, because it had been such a long time. I was just wondering how that tracked.
Okay,
And I know we don't get the reports regularly, but it was
right,
just,
that's absorbed in the operating budget for operations and maintenance department. So they've incorporated the cost of those replacement filters and any maintenance and operating costs for the no-des unit in their budget. But if you'd like, I can find out a little bit more
well, I
closely.
can find out later. I just wondered whether it was, that added to the operating expense in general.
It becomes an operating expense for the O&M department, so it's definitely
Christine can
built
give
into
you
the
that
budget.
information, yeah. And at the
Christine, did
next
you-
update.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, we can give you information on it.
All right, anyone else? Or you have more?
Nope, that's nothing else, yeah, really.
Well, okay. Does anyone from the public wish to address the board on this item?
Of course.
Thank you, Becky Steinbrunner. This is an amazing report. You're amazing. It's very, very nicely organized and clear to read. Thank you. And I like the photographs, too. I just want to point out that I'm seeing a 17% projected rate increase, and that hasn't been talked about too much. So I think your ratepayers would be very interested in that for 2018, 2019. And moving on to a 9% increase and then going down eventually in 2025 to a 4% increase. So I'm guessing that this very large rate increase is to pay for pure water Soquel. And so that brings me back to my question is, this seems like a done deal. I also have a question about the number of projected service installations. It seems pretty constant at 4,060 every year. Is that number based on the projected growth of this area? And is it also, it's a static number, it doesn't seem to reflect the current situation of severe groundwater overdraft, or how that might be relieved in the future and tied to that contingency of having a supplemental secured supply. I also see that the last water demand offset fee is in 2023-24, and so I'd like to have a little bit of discussion about that. It seems like you're really hoping you're going to be out of that picture and with your secondary supplementary supply secured, but I'd like some discussion about how that was arrived. And I have some questions about that $600,000 from Barry Swenson Builder in the Aptos Village project. What is that for? What is the rate? And when do you expect that payment? Because that affects me in my area, and I'm curious about a $600,000 payment to you from Barry Swenson Builder. And I'm also curious about the TCP treatment and how that's coming along. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address us on this item?
Why isn't Barry Swenson paying $2 million for all the damage and hardship he's done to Aptos and the depletion of the water resources with the special well being put in to accommodate the Aptos Village project, plus the other cave-ins and concessions by your management and previously this board? Inexcusable. Mr. Swenson ought to pay perhaps $3 million to be allowed to continue with the project. We'll see about that. On the budget items, I understand, or I saw elsewhere, that you're adding staff or proposing to do so for the purpose of writing grant applications. You know, in organizations I was in, management came in on salary, people overpaid, perhaps here, like Mr. Duncan and Mr. Dufour, and even members of the board. But staff came in and we worked on grant applications on Saturdays. And we got them done, and we got them done well. To add redundant staff on the backs of the Soquel Creek Water District ratepayers for additional employees to write proposals when you could have, that should be part of the job responsibilities of your overpaid executives and managers. I'd like an explanation for that. One of you wants to try to offer it.
Are you done?
And also, 17% increase, preposterously outrageous. Your costs aren't going up that much. Your costs are going up because you don't manage your resources and your facilities and your personnel well enough, especially your personnel budgets well enough. And in fact, you ought to have teams to compete against each other for efficiency so that you can reduce your rates, not increase them.
Okay. Anyone else wish to address us on this item? Okay. No more public comment. Any from the board?
I had a number of questions and suggestions.
Maybe we should address some of those questions that were brought up.
Okay,
A couple of them while they're fresh, then.
Sure.
If you're okay.
Sounds great.
I don't know how many times we've said it, but the Granite Way well in Aptos isn't specifically not for any one project. It was developed to replace another well, period, and to have more inland pumping. So, but the other questions that were asked on numbers of services that were in there and explaining the rate increase, and the reason for the WDO fee ending, maybe Leslie can
Sure.
address.
I'd be happy to. What Becky is referring to is actually the long-range planning spreadsheets. And those are really a pro forma spreadsheet. They're not something that's written in stone. It's a planning document, so we know what's coming up in the future. And we try and throw every contingency in there to figure out, okay, what are our needs likely to be? What might they be? What things can be put off? What things need to be shuffled about? What picture does that create for us in terms of what would our rates need to be? What would our reserves need to be? So when we do something like that, we try and be fairly conservative. And when we're talking about something like number of service connections, the number of service connections is directly tied to how much revenue we think we would be able to pull in off of developer fees. And so we keep that fairly static because we are a really low growth area. We don't anticipate a lot of new development in our area. We're very built out. And so we don't factor that in because we don't want to rely on that revenue and then not have it available to us. So we're
That was
pretty
just number of services, not added services. I just wanted to clarify.
Right, that was the number of services, not increasing, fairly static in nature. The other thing is the 17% rate increase. That's not something that's been adopted or mandated yet. What that is simply when we take a look at some of the things that we've got coming up that we're planning to do and the timing of some of those things that may or may not happen but are likely to happen, that has the potential to require a fairly large increase next year in order to get done everything that we have on the horizon. But the decision as to what we actually undertake and what we postpone and what other decisions we make are part of the annual budget process. And so this planning document will be updated annually to reflect those decisions we make on an annual basis. So those numbers are subject to change. They're really just kind of a prospective look at this is what it could look like if these other factors were to take place. It's a pro forma.
Okay, your comment's done. Questions from the board?
I just wanted to make sure, I mean, this is a budget, not a rate study.
Correct, this is not a rate study.
There
And
are
the
two
rate
different
study
things.
will inform what those rate increases actually would need to be.
And we have community members involved in that as well.
Right.
And in fact, in the past, there have been suggestions about what the budget should be, and the board has changed it around.
Right.
Either decided for a lower rate or something different, and so it's a moving target right now.
Right, this is simply a prospective look so that we've got some idea what planning decisions we need to make.
It's a what-if kind of a
Right.
study.
Right.
Okay, and you had some questions.
Yeah, okay. I'll start off page 62. These are numbers in the agenda packet. Right up there at the top, it says, and it's talking about the transfer scheme and pipe study and so forth. And it says, while a water purchase in 2018 is dependent on rainfall, ... And it makes it sound like it's actually possible to have a purchase happen for 2017, 2018. And as mentioned further on in the document, and has been mentioned several times here at the board meetings, that's not happening. There will be no purchase in 17, 18.
We'll
So
make that correction.
I think that would be a
Yep.
good thing to,
18.
not set people's expectations that it might happen when we know for sure it won't, because we'll be doing the pipe study that,
Yep.
then.
To make sure it's safe first.
Right, exactly. The next item is on page 65, and it's the big blue segment called Beginning Reserves, and some of that big segment is indeed reserves. Some of it is, as you described down in the text, really not reserves, but encumbrances, things that we planned last year that we didn't get done, and so some of that money is being carried over to the next year. And I'd like to see that broken out separately, because it's kind of confusing, because that blue segment, as we've got it there, if encumbrances are hidden away in that blue, it'll go up and down and back and forth from year to year. In fact, one member of the public saw that changing over the years and decided to, get upset about it because it sounded like, we weren't managing well, because it looked like our reserves were being screwed around with from one year to the next. And it wasn't reserves, it was just one year we had a lot of things carried over, and the next year we didn't. So I'd like to see that broken out so that it's separate, because then it makes it clear. Actually having more detail make that process more clarity. Okay, the next one is on page 67, and it's a sentence that I would like to talk about. It's in the third bullet down, and it says, therefore, as operating costs escalate, the amount required to be held in reserve increases and reduces the amount available for CIP spending. And that is a concern because, in the future, that alone can constrict us. And it's something I'm going to talk about when we get to the rate study, the reserve stuff later, about what should we do? How much should the reserves have? And, how many reserves should we have? And stuff like that. So I just wanted to point that out, that is an issue that can be to our detriment. Okay, the next one's on page 72, starts on 71, and it talks about the home of the annual Begonia Festival. And this year, unfortunately, is the last year for the Begonia Festival. So again, advertising this great Begonia Festival is maybe not a wise thing unless we say that it has been a great thing and this is its last year or something, because that's disappearing. The next item is on page 73, and it talks about notable employers in our area, includes Cessnon House. And I think Cessnon House is actually part of Cabrillo College and is not a giant employer. I know that the cooking classes, Cabrillo cooking classes, happen in that building, but I'm not aware of it being a giant employer.
They're actually noted in the community assessment project as the district doesn't have any particularly large employers, not like the city of Santa Cruz. So we're talking about just our district service area.
Yeah.
And Cessnon House actually is listed as one of the larger employers. I don't know if they hire a lot of temporary personnel or a lot of student workers or how they figure that, but it is in the community.
I think it would be safe to say because people that graduate from that program supposedly have a almost guaranteed job. So in that sense, they get people placed in jobs, but they don't actually hire lots of people.
They're notable for something else.
They're notable
perhaps.
for something, right.
Yeah, we can take it out.
Yeah,
It was just listed in the county demographic
Any grocery
data.
store in our district, any hardware store in our district has a lot more employees than Cessnon House. Okay, the next is on page 77. The very bottom there, it says, these aquifers are shared with other pumpers, including City of Santa Cruz, Central Water District, few small water mutual and private well owners. And since we're talking about these aquifers, it'll also be the City of Watsonville and Pajaro Valley, because they use the enormous red sands, and they're big users of that aquifer. Okay, on page 78, seawater intrusion has been detected in coastal monitoring wells in Aptos, Seascape, and La Selva Beach. And I think since we're talking about our aquifers, we should also add Live Oak there, because...
Add which one?
And the sentence that says, seawater intrusion has been detected in coastal monitoring wells in Aptos, Seascape, and La Selva Beach. And it also has been detected in Live Oak.
Okay.
Pleasure Point area.
Yeah, or Pleasure Point.
Thought we had that somewhere.
And there's another phrase on that same page in the right-hand column that I take great pains with. It says, we're talking about desal here, and it says, the City of Santa Cruz decided to step back from the project, opening the door for Soquel Creek Water District to proactively pursue other, and that's...
Generous.
Well, that's way excessive. They did a lot more than simply open the door for us. They shoved us through the door. So, I think that, I would prefer that to be rephrased.
Okay. Requiring or something.
Requiring,
Yeah, required.
requiring us to just pursue other options.
Yep. Couple things on page 80. It says, under governance, Soquel Creek Water District is a special district established by the state of California. And this was not established by the state. They enabled it. They have enabling legislation, but they didn't actually, unlike Pajaro Valley, which actually was established by the legislature, they didn't establish our district. They have legislation under which we were formed, but wasn't done by the state. And the last sentence on that page is meetings, plural, are most often held at the Capitola City Council chambers.
I saw that and I didn't mark it.
And that's it.
I saw that
That's
too.
all I had.
I have one typo,
Michelle?
just to show that I was actually reading it. On page 174, under unfunded projects, sewer lateral at Ledyard, and you can imagine that I would catch that you did not write lateral under the project.
Oh, okay.
I was like, what's a sewer later?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
New high tech.
That's pretty good. I didn't
Sewer
understand
later.
it, but I assumed it was me.
Okay, so
Good thing
any
you
more?
have
Do
me,
you have any
huh?
more?
No, I'm not gonna.
Okay, so you made some suggested changes, which were all, to me, fairly reasonable.
Yes.
We have to decide whether to approve it with those changes or bring it back again.
That was a lot of changes.
It was?
So maybe I need to bring it back.
Fine.
I don't think so.
We can do this. We can do it. Got minutes? You
I
know?
don't think,
Yeah, I've taken notes, so it's
No, I
totally
see.
up to the board, but I'm
I'd
happy
be
to
glad
do
to
whatever you
check my
prefer.
changes with you if you want.
Okay.
That would ease your mind.
most of them were,
Wow.
typos and descriptions
Right.
and not substantive,
Yeah.
Items.
changes.
Okay.
I mean, important to be correct, but I mean, anybody want to make a motion, I'll entertain that.
I'll move to approve it with the changes.
Okay.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Excellent job, by the way.
Yeah, it was really.
I was very impressed.
And I know for the public and for us, making a budget something understandable and readable is a really hard thing to do, so thank you. So the next item is actually, also two items are related. So the first is the district debt management policy.
So the district debt management policy is something that came up in our discussions at the board budget workshop. And the goal of the policy is really to allow for more strategic planning and long-term planning over how we're managing our debt issuances. So it's going to promote some greater transparency over some of the decision-making that we're engaging in. And it'll communicate to our credit issuers and the rating agencies that we're making sound, prudent financial decisions. So the board parameters that were given to us at the budget workshop were that you wanted to limit the use of funds to capital improvement projects rather than operating expenses, and that you wanted to use a debt coverage ratio target to set our spending limits. So we're kind of bringing this back to you with a recommended 1.7 minimum target for our debt coverage ratio. Bond covenant target, or the bond covenant requirement, is 1.2. So this gives us a little bit of a margin to give us that cushion, so we're not flirting too closely with our ratings. You also wanted us to look into some more flexible alternative debt instruments, such as lines of credit, to kind of provide some of that gap financing if we needed it. So the GFOA, or the Government Finance Officers Association, has some pretty robust guidelines for debt management policies. So we did, actually Ryan did quite a bit of research into that for us. And so the acceptable uses of debt that I've outlined here for you are for the acquisition of capital assets, not for operating projects, and that those capital assets would have to be equal to the life of the debt service. That's actually something a lot of agencies, bonding agencies and debt issuers require as part of their covenant. And then the construction or replacement of facilities, the acquisition of any land or right-of-ways necessary to construct a capital project, any debt restructuring or refunding or retirement of debt, and any interim project cash flow financing, which I think is the lines of credit that we were kind of talking about. The approved instruments under the policy would be the revenue bonds, COP, low-interest government loans, lines of credit, private placement loans if we decided to go that way, and any refunding bonds. So we've brought it back to you this evening to take a look at, and we've brought it in a resolution format for you to adopt a resolution for this policy if you should choose to do so.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on questions on this item? Surprise.
Thank you, Becky Steinbrenner. I have a question. I remember at the draft budget meeting, your board talked about that the policy has been for a large capital improvement project such as the tank on Quail Run, you borrow the full amount. And I remember Director Lather pointed out that there are mechanisms that allow you, like the state revolving fund, to not pay debt service on the full amount, but only pay as you actually construct things. And I wonder if that's being taken into consideration. It seems like a really good tool to reduce debt service.
Yeah, that's one of the alternative instruments that we're looking at in terms of lines of credit or low-interest government loans are structured that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any in the board? Bruce?
I have two things.
Okay.
One is on page 248, and it's to strengthen something. Under background, at the end of that first paragraph, it says, adherence to a debt management policy communicates to rating agencies in the capital markets that an organization is well managed and should meet its obligations in a timely manner. And I would like to make that stronger, make it be first person, essentially. I'd say, we adhere to a debt management policy in order to communicate to rating agencies in the capital markets that our organization is well managed and will meet its obligations in a timely manner. It's a positive statement rather than just kind of this generic observation.
Okay.
If you think that's okay.
Yeah, we can change that.
Okay. And finally, on page 251, under repayment, it's talking about the district desires level debt service payments over the term of the debt. And I'm thinking maybe we shouldn't make something stronger there. And a good counterexample to that is, I know that a lot of people, homeowners who had loans that were balloon payment kind of things. And, you know, I certainly don't want the district to ever go down that road. And I think we should make some kind of, just simply having it be kind of level is very different than a balloon payment kind of scenario. And I think we should make a statement about, you know, how unlevel are we willing to make it?
And how unlevel would that be?
Well, I would certainly never ever approve any loan that is a balloon payment where we pay just the interest and that the principal is due at the end. I mean, that's a disaster waiting to happen. So something that extreme I would never go for. And as it gets less extreme, I become more willing to listen, but I think you're right that we desire to have level debt service. I mean, it's interesting that in the budget we just went through, some of the loans we have are not level. They've been carefully arranged so that, you know, one stops, another starts, and, you know, they adjust to each other.
Right.
So they're not level. None of them by themselves is level.
Our level, no, the debt portfolio has been structured in such a way that we're at about 2.5 million annually in
that's right.
debt service.
And it was cleverly done so that it arranged so that, the overall was level, but the individual ones weren't.
And that's fine?
That's fine.
Okay.
But I think anything that's starting to get into where a particular loan by itself is kind of getting to be like a balloon payment where, let's borrow a lot right now because we can do it in this way that's real cheap and we'll let the next board fix the problem. I don't want to ever get into that kind of situation. So I don't know how to phrase that, but
Okay.
personally, that kind of thing I think is a poison pill.
I mean, we would vote on any
We would.
debt.
We would, but
But
we're
I
putting
think-
down
Right,
our desires, our
do you want
plans.
to add something that just
policy.
says we would avoid any debt that requires a balloon payment
Or anything like that.
or that has, however you would word that.
Have we ever done that?
No,
I don't even
No.
know if there's any out there.
not in my service.
I don't know either.
We did borrow COP funds where we paid interest only for the first few years, and the principal didn't kick in until some of our other
But
debt had been retired.
that's, again,
Yeah,
having them fit in with the other loans that we've got.
right.
So I don't know how to phrase it. It's just, I hope you get my concern. And
We
Okay.
just want to avoid.
We'll
if we
incorporate
can put
that.
it in writing, then we've put forward a good
Documented it.
policy that we all understand.
Okay.
Anybody else? Michelle? Okay, so some suggestions, but overall,
We're all good.
good? So I'll move approval of it with those ideas, those changes incorporated.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye. Roll call?
Oh, it's
Roll
roll
call.
call.
You're right.
Director Lather,
Yes.
Director Daniels,
Yes.
Director Christensen, and
Yes.
President Leahy.
Yes, thank you for remembering that. All right, the next one is district reserve policy.
Okay, this is item 6.5, and it's a resolution to adopt a reserve policy. We actually already have an operating reserve policy in place that is our operating contingency reserve. That policy has not changed. It's simply been rolled into an umbrella reserve policy that would have a capital facilities reserve component to it. So the operating section has not changed. So the goal of this type of policy, and once again, this was something that was discussed at the board budget workshop, and we brought it back to you with our recommendations. And the goal of the policy is really to formulate a strategic commitment to our maintaining our infrastructure assets and our water distribution system. A lot of times what happens is these type of projects are the ones that slip when we have a lack of funding. So industry practice is a good financial policy or good financial practice, and you're setting yourself up again as a prudent, financially responsible agency if you adopt a reserve policy for some of these capital improvements, especially for an agency such as ours because we are so capital intensive. So this is a project that, or this is a policy that would allow you then to set up a capital facilities reserve, and I think we had brought back to the board at one point an infrastructure maintenance reserve, and this is similar in nature to that. However, we have expanded it to be a capital facilities reserve, so it wouldn't be only maintenance of existing assets, but any improvements to the system, as well as improvements to the transfer of water between service areas and that type of thing. So it would be infrastructure maintenance or enhancement. And the funding mechanism for this would be different from the operating contingency reserve. It would be to take a look at our net gain in financial position at the end of each fiscal financial statement year end, when we take a look at our financial statements and our audited CAFR, and that net gain in position is what could be allocated then toward a capital facilities reserve. But it's a very open allocation. The board would make that determination every year as to how much they wanted to move into this reserve. And then this reserve would be tracked in a similar manner to the operating contingency reserve reserve, in that I would bring you a quarterly report that showed what the balance was and what funds had been expended from that reserve.
Anyone from the audience, from the public wish to address us on this item? All right, seeing none. Board members, questions, thoughts? Yes, Bruce?
So I got some thoughts. Just to start off, I'm against this, and what I'm against is not having a reserve. I think is a good idea. I mean, the world out there is uncertain, and having something to, save you in those times when something pops up that you didn't expect is a good thing. My problem is having multiple reserves, each with its own little pot of money, each with its own little goal, its own little area, because how can you predict which of those is going to be used? I mean, we have right now a rate stabilization reserve. I don't think we've ever used it, and I don't think we ever will.
That's actually mandated by bond covenant, yeah.
It's in the debts that we have to have that. But I'm just saying, that's an example of a reserve that really isn't a reserve for us. We will never use it to stabilize rates, because in fact, all we've done the last 10 years and all we're going to do for the next 20 years is change rates, increase them. So, and when we run into a problem, we do have our emergency reserve rate increases so we can solve things. Or when we have a problem, we can decide a CIP project that we're planning this year, let's just not do it this year. We've done that in the past. So, a rate stabilization reserve doesn't serve any purpose, as stated, other than it's required of us.
Just to clarify, the rates that it's referring to are actually, it's actually not to manage our customer rates. What it is, it's to manage our credit rating. So a rate stabilization reserve is legally the only reserve mechanism that you can use to move into, if you take out of that reserve and move it into operations, you can call it operating revenue as opposed to a reserve allocation. And by doing that, you can save yourself from risking that debt covenant or your debt coverage ratio dropping below your bond covenant amounts. So if we had a fiscal year in which we had some expenditures that cropped up and things got out of control and we were on the verge of dropping below the minimum 1.2 requirement, that rate stabilization reserve is in place to actually move into operating revenues, be declared a revenue source, and maintaining our debt coverage ratio. So it doesn't really have anything to do with our customer rate structure as it is protecting our credit rating.
But the effect is that we have $2 million sitting there earning almost zip interest, and it's something we can't really use.
Right.
And in fact, we could make good use of the $2 million, because in past years, we've not been prepaying our OPEB, which, as you've discussed, would save us millions of dollars if we could do that. So that would be a case where a reserve could have, that was more freely usable, could have actually saved us a lot of money. Instead, it's just sitting there not doing anything. And I can see that kind of thing happening here. We already have the operating reserve fund that we use, and it is stated for unanticipated operating costs or revenue shortfalls, and also for repairs or improvements and fixed asset acquisitions. So this new reserve we're talking about creating already could be handled by the reserve we have today. And in fact, we have used that. If we do go out for a contract for something and it comes in more than we've budgeted, we'll take something out of our OCR and use it for that. Or if in doing the project, there are overruns, unexpected things, we'll take out an OCR to cover it. So we already use it for fixed asset kinds of things that we're doing. So there's no reason we couldn't use that fund with no change to do some of the functions that you want this new fund, new reserve to do. And if we're looking at uncertainties, there are all kinds of reserves we could create. Like, we're not sure if saltwater intrusion is going to come in and invade some of our wells. So maybe we should have a saltwater intrusion reserve. We've talked about the fact that, the OPEB financing that the state does, the rate structure, that's dependent on the stocks and bonds out there that they invest in. And So that can change, and so maybe we should have an OPEP reserve so that if those rates go up or down, we can deal with them. The benefits, the medical benefits can go up and down. Maybe we should have a benefits reserve. Climate change, that's uncertainty. We should have climate change. So we in theory could have a bazillion reserves, each of them, well-founded with, the fact that there are uncertainties, but, any money that gets put into one reserve and that thing doesn't happen, that's money that's lost, that's stuck, that we're not used. I would much prefer to have one reserve, and we decide on a year-to-year basis what to pull it out for, if anything.
The operating contingency reserve, we have dipped into that in the past, and we probably shouldn't be to the extent that we have. We are mandated under California Government Code to maintain sufficient reserves for 6 months of operations. And so that's what the operating contingency reserve is really designed to do, is to give us the cash flow in the event of catastrophic disruption of our system. And
From the operations standpoint.
from an operations standpoint. So, if we were to have, and we are in a high risk area for natural disaster, so if we were to have something happen there, we would need to make sure that we're able to make our payroll, that we're able to make all of our debt payments, that we're able to keep the lights on, that we're able to keep the system going to the extent we can. We may lose revenue if a certain percentage of our system goes down and we can't deliver water to some of those customers. We wouldn't be able to collect revenue from those customers. So it's really a catastrophic reserve, and the state actually requires us to have sufficient liquidity and reserves to get through 6 months of operations. Right now, we've got 40% set aside, which is a little low.
Well, if we want to do that, then maybe we should change this policy to have the operating reserve only for operating things. So that we don't keep using it for fixed.
Capital. And that
think
should be
that was
the
the goal
intent
of
of this
this.
policy, is to have our capital things that we come back to you with, where we've got an overrun or we've got something that's happened, an emergency main replacement, and have it come out of a capital maintenance reserve.
Right.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So the board would decide, you said it every year, how much to place into this reserve, correct? Based
Correct.
on, and then if we needed it for capital stuff, obviously then we could use it. If during the year we decided we needed to use it for something else, could the board vote to then move money out of that?
This is a board-adopted policy and can be revised at any point in time by board action.
You'd have to change the policy. but
Right, you
go
have to
back and
change the
Yeah.
policy, okay.
My question is, do you have to have board approval to tap into it? I know at the county you do, in the capital improvement.
So what
Reserve.
we've typically done is up to a certain limit. Oh, actually, under the operating contingency reserve, anytime we dipped into it, we had to come back. Sorry, I misspoke.
So it'd
Anytime
probably be
we
the same
used
with
it, we had to come back for board authorization. So it would be the same, mechanism under the capital reserve.
This was part, what we discussed previously at the budget workshop, right? Correct,
Mhm.
with, about, a special fund for things like doing the water main replacements that came up, the emergency, kind of an emergency replacement fund.
Right.
So I think, I thought we understood that at the budget meeting, at that point, that what the rationale for this fund was.
Yeah, that's the rationale.
So,
Well,
Yeah,
if we use the OCR fund just for operating things, I think almost all the times we dip into it, it's for various fixed asset things. So if we didn't do that anymore, then we'd have to recognize the OCR fund would kind of just sit there like an insurance policy and not be used, waiting for a disaster to happen, as you
Right.
say. So again, that's taking some of our ratepayers' money and putting it aside and not using it. And we need to decide if that's a good thing or not.
But it's ensuring that the system can keep producing water and functioning in an emergency.
And you said that was required by the state of
It
California.
is we are required by the state of California to maintain reserves sufficient to get through 6 months of operations if something were to happen.
Well, if we had a major earthquake here, this thing would not be sufficient for that.
And it also indicates to any credit issuers or rating agencies that we're protecting ourselves in the event of unforeseen circumstances.
Any other questions, comments?
No, I'd just like to offer the opposite. The clubhouse water mains breakage, the multiple breakages that happened, that was a mini emergency that was, now how would we fund that into the system? It was an emergency. It was just breaking.
Right, and I think a lot of times the repairs were facilitated by staff, so it was simply staff labor and hours that had already been budgeted. But if we were to incur some contractor expenses associated with something like that, then it would come out of a capital facilities reserve.
And we've had things like that in the past, and what we've done is kind of what we did this time, is that we picked a project that, for one reason or another, we could defer and put the money into this emergency thing instead.
Except that
I'm
the
just
other one was
afraid
at
that we're going to be
risk.
deferring so much, and
Yeah.
everything's the same age, and you could have multiple emergencies in a year, and then there's no project to move it
Well,
from.
then we need to increase our revenues much more to have all that. I mean,
We have deferred a great deal of maintenance
yes.
up to this point. It's the one area that kind of slips when we are doing our budget process and we run out of funds.
And, not this coming year, but the year after that is the last year of our COP funds. So that means only thing we're doing is pay-as-you-go facility
Right.
increases and repairs. So, and I think the current plan is that we wouldn't use any of the loan we might get for the pure water to do additional CIP stuff.
Right.
So that means that's not going to happen until we kind of get out of the woods here, and that could be 10 years.
That's why we need a reserve,
Well,
because we're going to be putting the money into something other than maintenance and replacement projects.
well, it means right off the top, money's going to go into the reserves and not into projects. So if it takes us 5 years to fill up the reserve, that means 5 years of
But we're
diminished projects.
deciding how much it is,
Right, based on,
not
there's-
with this
Not with this.
process, and this is just giving us the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, we could certainly create the reserve and never put anything into it. That's certainly not disallowed by this policy.
any motions or?
Well, I think it's a good idea to do it. I think about the aging infrastructure of our whole district, and, anything can come up, and we should really start planning to somehow or other, a planned response to that. And I think this was one approach to that, and so I'm making the motion to approve this resolution.
I'll second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Roll call.
Aye.
Oh, it's-
Oh, roll call, sorry.
Director Lather,
Yes.
Director Daniels,
No?
President LaHue,
Yes.
and Director Christensen, sorry, wrong order.
It still
yes.
works.
Okay, so motion passes, and then there was another potential motion which was to identify initial level of funding based on the 2015-16.
Correct.
So.
Which I believe was $1.3 million.
Yeah. So recommendations or thoughts on that?
Oh,
Where's that?
that was the other,
So the
the level of funding.
level of funding for the reserve right now. Gain in net position is 1.3 million from the last fiscal year.
I'd prefer to use that money to prepay more of OPED. But that's just me. That saves the district several $1 million. And that'd be good.
So this is carryover funding because we didn't spend the money?
Well, what it is it's the gain in net position, which means that either revenues were a little higher or expenditures were a little lower once we tabulated all of the financials for the year.
So we don't have to put the whole amount in.
You do not have to put the whole amount in. You can fund it up to that amount or any amount in between. And we do, we, just so you know, we do have money in the budget for, we have
First.
$500,000 for pension, just to get started.
First time in a while.
I'd be willing to discuss that like half and half or something like that. I noted the actual amount is just about the same as the contractor's repair, the cost of repairing clubhouse, replacing the main, the contractor we have out to
You
start work
really-
next week.
My concern is you really can't do much for under $1 million.
Exactly.
So I would propose that you put $1 million into the capital reserves, and then the rest could go towards.
Other fund, okay.
Mhm.
So that was a motion?
Yes.
So you moved that?
I move that $1 billion is used for
Billion?
Billion?
billion, yeah.
If I hear
How about
trillion?
bazillion?
Okay, let's make sure we get the right beginning
Sorry.
letter.
Don't we wish?
I don't know how that came out. 1 million is used for capital reserves, and then the remainder could be used for the
OPED.
OPED.
Or what, okay. Or should you just say how much we're putting in reserves now, just to
Okay,
keep it
so
simple?
just $1 million for the reserves.
I'll second that. Roll call for that, or no? No, it's not a resolution, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. The next item is an update on stormwater recharge. It's exciting,
Yeah, progress.
I know. I was trying to identify places on the map.
I know,
Hard.
that was hard.
Tiny little map.
Name up there.
Hi, good evening. Just a reminder, I'm Alyssa, and I work in conservation, and I've been working a lot on this project to identify sites for stormwater recharge. And we last brought this to the board in February, and so it's been a couple months, and we've made quite a bit of progress. So we're ready to show you what we've done. When we did talk at the February 7th meeting, we really had just started this process. And so we went over the work that had been done by other agencies in the region. Specifically, we did go into the managed aquifer recharge and runoff analysis study that has been done by the RCD and Andy Fisher's lab at UCSC. Just a reminder on that study, they analyzed the surface and subsurface factors that affect infiltration in the San Lorenzo River, Mid-County Santa Cruz, and Pajaro Valley groundwater drainage basins. And they also analyzed stormwater runoff. That so far has only been done for San Lorenzo and for Pajaro. And this information was put into maps and made available. And so we've been using that report since then, and all those available maps as kind of our launching point to identify some sites in our district that might be suitable for stormwater collection and groundwater recharge. So we're looking at the stormwater recharge as a project to generate offsets for the water demand offset program. The stated goal of the WDO program is to protect the groundwater basin from further impact while allowing planned growth in the district. And so far, all of our offset generating projects have accomplished this goal by conservation, so by decreasing consumption. But this project is a little bit different, and there's a couple of ways that it may meet this program goal, one of which is by adding supply for district production wells indirectly, or by protecting against seawater intrusion. So we've laid out a basic 5-step plan for identifying these sites to use for recharge. And so we've completed the first 2 steps on this roadmap. Number 1 is narrowing the search. And so that was just taking the whole district and trying to narrow it down to a smaller area that's a little more manageable to investigate. And that second step was just picking some parcels within that identified area. So we're currently on that 3rd step, which is grading the sites. And we're grading them against some criteria that we've come up with, and we'll go over in a minute. And so our proposed future steps in this process is after we've graded the sites, we'll kind of filter some of those down and bring that analysis back to you. And then sites that look promising, we'll confirm the assumptions that we made in the grading of the sites through on-site testing and through confirmation with professionals such as Andy and Hydrometrics. And then ultimately, once we selected the best site, we could work on designing the project. And so we're going to go into the methodology a little bit of what we have completed. So for the first step, narrowing the search. So we wanted to identify some general areas that are either in the district or adjacent to that would be the most suitable. And so we did rely a lot on that study of the managed aquifer recharge suitability, the maps that were produced for our region, and we also consulted with Hydrometrics. And in that MAR study, they looked at the surface and subsurface factors to determine the best areas. The surface factors were the nature of the bedrock, the soil type, and the elevation. And then the subsurface factors included the transmissivity, the available aquifer storage, the vadose zone thickness, and the recent changes in groundwater levels. And for our purposes, we probably going to want to look more at the subsurface factors. So this is the composite map that includes both the surface and the subsurface factors that was produced in the study. And the green parts are the locations that are more suitable, and the darker the green, the better they are. And then the pink locations are less suitable for infiltration. And so based on the general trends, you can see that the southeastern part of the district looks most suitable, which isn't surprising based on what we know about the Aromas aquifer in that area. But just to confirm that, we wanted to break down some of those subsurface factors and look at those layers on the map one by one. So I just pulled 2 out here, one of them for transmissivity and another for storage capacity. And we can see that it follows the same basic trend with less transmissivity in the Parissima part of the district and higher down in the Aromas. So given this information and after confirming this information with Hydrometrics, we decided to focus our initial investigations on areas that are south of Aptos Creek in the district service area 3 and 4. And so this doesn't mean that the rest of the district is going to be off limits for stormwater recharge forever, but we think that for now we can get the best bang for our buck if we focus in the aromas. So after narrowing it down to a general area, we wanted to search for parcels in the area that look like they may receive some stormwater runoff. So we used just a general terrain map in order to see where the stormwater may naturally collect. And we recognize that there are some limits to this approach. We've not considered how drainage may have been modified by people, and we don't have a real good sense of the on-site conditions on any of the parcels we were looking at. So we were just looking for major trends, particularly when selecting private parcels to look at. And ultimately, we would like to use a more detailed model. The precipitation runoff model for our area would be more detailed. It was supposed to be included in the managed aquifer recharge study. It was actually completed for the San Lorenzo and Pajaro Valley areas, but it hasn't been completed for ours yet. The last that we heard is they have that UCSC lab has a student working on our area, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks to months we can get that result. So using this approach, we selected 17 sites to investigate further, and we're assessing as many district and public sites as we can because they would be the easiest logistically. We wouldn't have to negotiate terms with a private landowner. Some of the district sites in particular are quite small. They may be able to support a small infiltration device like a dry well. And we included these 7 sites, the district and public. There were a couple others that pretty clearly weren't going to work, things that were very close to the ocean or looked like they were not going to receive any runoff. So in addition to these sites, we looked at the large private parcels that looked like they were going to have the best potential, and as you can see, we have a lot more potential acreage to work with if we go into private parcels. But it's important to note that we haven't talked to any of these owners yet. So this is really preliminary. These 10 sites we identified, we don't know if they would want to participate in this or not. So some of those may get eliminated pretty quickly. And so the numbers are kind of hard to see on this graph, but these salmon-colored areas are all of the sites that we selected. It's included as attachment 2 to the memo, and each one has a number which corresponds to a column on the grading matrix. And just for perspective, the one way up at the top is Polo Grounds Park, and then all the way down at the bottom, that's looking just south of La Selva Beach. And sites 11, 12, and 17 are not actually in the district boundaries, but they're directly adjacent. So we feel that a project in those areas may still have a benefit to the district. So taking those sites, we've put them into a grading spreadsheet, and we're compiling a lot of information right now. This is the stage that we're on currently. The first is just all the parcel information, basic things like the APN and the lot size and use. And then we have a category for fatal flaws. 2 big ones right off the top are availability and accessibility. Availability is going to be our next hurdle to tackle as we approach some of these private landowners. Then we go into potential challenges. This is a category that has been constantly expanding as we investigate more. Some notable things that we're concerned about are potential water rights issues and endangered species or archaeological concerns. So things that fall into this category wouldn't necessarily be a fatal flaw, but they are definitely things that we are going to want to look at going forward and should play a part in deciding if we want to pursue those sites. And then we have a category for the MAR suitability. So I showed you kind of the overview of these factors, but we've gone through and looked at every layer, such as the transmissivity and the depth to groundwater, all of that, and got a number for that. So we're in the process of taking all those numbers and seeing what they really mean, because each site is really individual. Even some of the large sites vary a lot from one side to the other. And then eventually we're going to go into design considerations based on what we know, what we may need for treatment, what kind of infiltration technologies would be appropriate. So the takeaway from all of this is that it's a lot more complicated than it may appear, or that we may have known when we first embarked on this. Not only is every site unique, but some of the conditions do vary across the sites. There's a lot of will to make these projects happen, but not a lot of direction from a regulatory perspective on using stormwater for groundwater recharge. And we don't have a lot of good examples to use of other projects that have the same goals that we do. And so we're learning new things every day, and the criteria for assessing these sites is changing as we learn. We think that we're making good progress, but definitely some more work to do. So we have a couple possible board actions for anything that the board would like us to pursue in these investigations. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
All righty. Does anyone in the public wishes to address the board on this item? Might as well get it now.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. My name is Becky Steiner, and I'm really interested in this. I've been watching what they're doing in the Pajaro Valley with that big project, and I really applaud the district for moving ahead on considering this. I have some questions about how the sites were selected, because my daughter actually brought up that the freeway interchanges, in the center there could be very good places and close to some potentially polluted stormwater runoff. So I wonder if those areas are considered. I saw in your report that there were a number of sites evaluated, but they were too close to the ocean to benefit. But I did see that one of the places considered is the ranch land, probably at Deer Park. So I guess I'd like to understand a little bit better about how these sites were chosen. Some that came to my mind that I don't see on your list are Aptos High, the Rancho Del Mar Center with some dry wells, St. Andrew's Church up off of Soquel Drive. And I also would really be curious to jump back to the Purisima Aquifer and find out if the land, the 150 acres of land that the district owns, I think it's up on Glenwood or Glen Canyon, could that be put to use for some recharge effort? Which brings me to my last piece is what would the distribution system, collection and distribution system look like for this kind of effort? I think you'd really want to have the source, the stormwater runoff source, like from a parking lot or whatever, as close to the site as possible, so that affects things. But what kind of expense would it take for the distribution system to really make this, something like this work? And my final thing is, what is a VADOS zone? I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Thank you.
The VADOS zone is just the non-saturated portion below the soil surface, so from the ground surface to the water table, basically. That's the VADOS zone.
So it's like the potential zone that you could fill and saturate.
Water would move through there eventually and be treated on the way down, right? Okay, so, yes.
I endorse each of the, I'm Colonel Maxwell, and I endorse each of the concerns that Ms. Steinbrenner very astutely mentioned and referenced. Don't think they need to be restated, they're in your record. I want to point out that any supervisory managers, personnel, or executives of the Water Board that failed to direct at the items and the locations Ms. Steinbrenner made reference to were not considered, that person should, for incompetence or inefficiency, should forfeit 1 month's salary for the year. Again, motivate competent performance. If you the staff fail to consider, or managers fail to direct consideration of all those locations, especially the property owned by the district, that's incompetence, and they should pay a financial penalty.
Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board on this item? Okay. Board?
I could start.
Okay.
Sure.
One thing is, I don't like the word grading, because in my mind, you're grading the site, which means you're going
No
out there with a
bulldozer.
bulldozer.
Yeah.
And I'd prefer that you change it to rating.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah. I always like to come up with a solution with my... Also, I believe I read somewhere that the state has recently passed some legislation or made some decisions that have made it easier to do recharge projects with drainage. I don't remember where, and I will look it up, but I read it somewhere. And I don't usually dream these things up. It's usually based in reality, so I'll look for that for you.
Okay, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
really helpful.
The Caltrans easement issue, Caltrans has a requirement in Aptos to maintain these drainage basins for the long-toed salamanders. So for us to take any of their drainage would be, I don't think would be feasible, but it would be, it's a good idea to look at that. Because I'm an engineer, I have the engineering issues with the high school and Deer Park and the church. The high school already has a basin that they turned into they have a ball field that they graded. And then below that is a basin already that is used for recharge, so it would be kind of redundant to put one out there. Deer Park, I guess you could get the roof drainage, but that's not a big volume. The big volumes are happening down in Rio Del Mar Flats at the golf course. I live there, I see them because I walk every day. And I think the church is too high up too. So from the best bang for your buck standpoint, I think the ones that they looked at are the best ones to proceed with investigating whether or not they're feasible. I don't think Alyssa should give up a month's pay over this, because I think that she made a very good...
Okay, okay, enough.
Enough.
No more comments.
And there shouldn't be a distribution system, because like you said, you want to get the stormwater in a location and use it to recharge where it is. So I don't know if you had a distribution system, but this is so preliminary. So those are my answers on the engineering questions. And I also just know about the long-toed salamander thing because I was working in planning when that happened, and when they did some of the work out there. Other than that, I have no other comments.
I have a question. I
Carla?
have a couple questions. And one is, I thought it was significant that the best possible recharge sites were exactly where we have saltwater intrusion in the monitoring wells. Is that,
That was the other question.
what is that connection? Or is there even a connection?
Transmissivity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping.
Sandy soil or something?
I mean, it's kind of related to this. I was hoping to have maybe next time on the map where you show where the sites were, to show us where the monitoring wells are and also the production wells.
Okay, I can definitely do that.
And then I noticed in the report too that you wanted to check back on Andy Fisher's assumptions. Did you do any of that? Did you find any assumptions that needed to be corrected?
We haven't yet. Primarily what we're talking about too there is all of the subsurface factors that he used were from the previous groundwater study. And so once our groundwater model is complete, they're going to recalibrate the model. So it will be good for us to, when we identify a site, to confirm what the real conditions are right now.
Oh, okay, good. 'Cause that was my third question, was about the mythical. It's not mythical, it's coming up, the groundwater
Yeah,
model.
and we still feel like there's a lot that we can do without the groundwater model, but that will help to kind of confirm that the water we're putting down may be getting where we want it to go and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and also I'd like to make one more comment too about that piece of property up Glen Haven. That was a stormwater. It was to take stormwater and preserve it as a reservoir, and I thought, oh, perfect possible drainage system, but I don't know anything about the geology of it. It seemed like it was they wouldn't put a reservoir there if it were very permeable.
I don't know too much about that site. There was some talk about maybe not wanting to put a recharge system on areas that are naturally recharging anyway. So that's something to consider. But we definitely can look at that in the future. It may be outside of the scope of our initial investigation.
That's all.
Yeah. Can we go back to, it was one of the first slides you had there about the 3 ways to save water kind of a thing. I'd like to. And by the way, if you want a PRMS model, the district has one and will soon have 2. We did one number of years ago to get the rainfall recharge relationship. That's that curved graph you've probably seen before. And that's the same one I use for my dissertation, is that model, and another one up in Sierras. So we have them. And the groundwater model that we're doing, the front end of that is PRMS. And it's, I'm not sure what its status is, but we'll soon have that one. And I guess Andy has his own, so.
Yeah, I think his is a little more granular. From what I remember, the one that we used for the recharge relationship study, the area is a lot bigger, and so it might not be useful on a site-by-site basis.
Yeah, I think we had 350 cells, something like that.
Which slide did you want?
Oh, it's when we talk about the 3 different ways to save water. There, no?
Yeah. well,
There it is, that's it. And I want to talk about number 3. I would make the contention that at least I am not interested in protecting against seawater intrusion arbitrarily. I mean, I don't want to go down into Pajaro and start stopping their saltwater intrusion. I don't want to go up into the north coast streams and stop their saltwater intrusion. I think my main interest in seawater intrusion is when it endangers our production wells. And if it has no effect on our production wells, then it's like, going out and spending millions of dollars saving fish. It's worth doing, but I don't think it's the role of this district to go spend millions of dollars saving the fish. And again, similarly, I don't think, spending a lot of money to stop saltwater intrusion when it has nothing to do with our production wells. So, looking on your graph, I would look at wells in the 1 through 9 region, because that's where our wells are. So you get down to, La Selva and Canyon del Sol and down that way, they have nothing to do with our production wells, and they never would have any effect. So saltwater intrusion might well happen there, and it would be good to stop it arbitrarily, but it doesn't do us, the district, any good to put it down there. So that's my contention. In any case, even if I get overruled, I think it's good to emphasize and prioritize 1 through 9, because that's where our production wells are. So if we can help stop saltwater intrusion in that kind of upper Aptos area, that would be worthwhile. And I would say that if it gets below that, it's not worth it at all, but that's just my contention.
Well, number 10 and 16 might have an effect. Is there- so 10 is right near
16
the,
maybe, yes, I would say 6.
10 is right near the seascape well, too.
Okay, all right,
I mean,
Well-
it'd be a barrier between them.
all right.
Um,
Then 1 through 10 and 16, yes.
I had a question also about Aptos High. I know that you had mentioned that it was a retention basin, but I don't know that it was designed for actual, recharge.
And so maybe it could be,
I think it might be a natural site that could be modified to allow much more recharge than happens. There just basically was a place to store stormwater so it didn't overflow. And I don't know what the bottom's like there and what inhibition there might be to actual recharge and whether that could be enhanced with a dry well or something like that.
that's a
So,
good
and
point.
it already collects all this stormwater coming down Freedom Boulevard. And it's not really influenced by that field they built much, really. So I don't want to give up on that site because it's in a good location to get into our usable water supply too. And then also just, Andy Fisher's got a lot of experience already with some projects. And so I don't know, are you going back to him to say, hey, here's what we got so far. Can you look at this and see which ones you think are feasible based on what you've done so far to get some help from somebody who's actually doing it?
We haven't approached him about that yet, but especially once we narrow down some sites that have willing landowners, that might be
Okay.
something that we can do.
We did have a meeting with the Resource Conservation District, who's
Good.
also partnering
Right.
with Andy, and our intent was to kind of go through some of these sites, but we spent basically the whole hour talking about some of the challenges with water rights and some of the projects that they're working on and how what they're experiencing could impact us. And so we're planning on doing more of that and
Yeah,
collaborating
just so you're
with
not
them.
stuck out there by yourself trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
collaborate regularly to say, hey.
And the other thing that they mentioned is, they can go in and we can work with them on permitting issues. So they do this routinely for different projects, and so, they're much more experienced at it, and we wouldn't be recreating the wheel.
Right.
We could work with that, partner with them, and have them facilitate our permitting efforts.
By the way, Andy did a presentation about stormwater recharge at the DWR last week. Okay. So did I. And if you would like me to go up and talk to him, I can certainly do that for you and with you, and I'd be willing to help.
He's
out there.
very generous with his time, so, yeah. We think he's really excited by the fact that people are using his work and moving ahead with projects, so.
And you did notice that Andy did address this water rights issue, that it is a big issue. That
Yeah, there's a lot
anytime
of
you take
uncertainty.
stormwater and put it down in the ground, it means it's not going where it used to go, and somewhere where it used to go might get upset. There was a case just up in the hills here where, one of the professors dug some wells and did some recharge, and he got sued, and he lost. So that definitely has to be looked at.
Public comments done for this item.
Short clarification. My comments earlier were either misunderstood or misinterpreted. When I say hold management accountable, I said executives and managers.
Okay.
Your executives start with Mr. Duncan, your director of operations, your director of engineering. They should be held accountable for both improving efficiency of the district's operations and not engaging in any inefficiencies or any poor management or any errors in judgment. It's on their hand, not on the worker bees. So please enforce, if you will, accountability to Mr. Duncan and your Director of Engineering and your Director of Operations.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I add just that we did not include the Glen Haven property because we were told from a hydrology standpoint that there's a natural barrier there between the Santa Margarita and the Parissima aquifers, so we didn't really go there.
Okay.
You know, that could be reinvestigated or verified with our hydrogeologist, or maybe Director Daniels knows that.
Most of the Parissima is covered with this terrace deposit. It's about 50, 60 feet thick, and you have to get through it. So you'd have to have a dry well that would basically punch down through that before you
Sure.
have any chance.
And then the sites that we did end up with, and maybe we didn't find some of the ones that Ms. Steinbrunner alluded to, we're using the basic hydrology kind of runoff terrain maps. And again, that's not as refined as what you would have with the PRMS model. And so when looking at those, the sites that you identified did not look promising. It could be that when we get that refined model, you know, there could be some new sites that pop up too. So this is not a fixed list. This is just an initial look at what we
That was
found.
a very good pass.
But I also am in agreement with Dr. Daniels about the southeastern sites. They're not near any of our production wells that, you know, we're not really helping ourselves. It's
President,
hard to
you-
justify.
No.
No.
Just for clarity, the site that you're referring to up in the hills is the Glenwood.
Oh, Glenwood. I
Uh,
said
Glenwood,
Glenhaven, yeah.
site.
That's
It's the Glenwood
different
site.
canyon.
I started that.
Glen Haven is near Soquel Creek.
Thank you for
Yeah.
your work.
And I'd like to add just two things, one micro and one macro. Director Christensen's comment about, is it serendipitous down there in the Aromas Red Sands where the seawater intrusion? The answer is no. That the water flows where it's more conductive, hydraulically conductive, and where there's more pull from the well, so the gradient. So I imagine those two combination. It was heavier down there. The hydrology for sure is better, and probably the pull was greater over time. And then I just want to say, what we've had the discussions at the staff level is that we're looking at this stormwater recharge, one, to get us over the hump with a WDO project. So go out there, get something, hopefully implement, get something going for the end of this fiscal year. I think that's on your strategic plan. That's the goal. But then in the larger scale also, we hope it holds promise for the 20-year vision, because where I see stormwater right now is where you know, some of these other ways of producing supplemental supplies were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They're behind that curve. There's water rights. There's all kinds of things, but it doesn't mean it doesn't hold promise. So we have a kind of a short-term and a long-term vision on this. Just want to throw
Okay.
that out.
Thank you.
I agree with you. They could look at that one location and look at grading it at Aptos High.
Grading or rating?
Not rating, maybe both. But I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be for recharge, but I could be completely wrong on that, and it's good to look into it.
We did look at that area, and our concerns there were that Aptos High, right, off Freedom Boulevard, they have a private well that they use to irrigate their fields, and so unfortunately, there's not a regulatory standard or even a best management practice for how far away from a pumping well you should put a recharge well or a recharge basin.
That's pretty far.
So we thought that might have been a little too close, but again, that could be refined, and you know, it could be valid to
But
put
I think
something
just the
there.
way groundwater flows is going to be away from the well up on the hill. You know, so
I
and it's
remember-
quite a ways away.
I remember when they were putting in those playing fields, that recharge was one of the considerations.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I was pretty sure it was, but I wasn't
checking into.
involved. Yeah, it's worth checking into. And the other idea that I had while everybody was talking is that I'm not sure how you're rating them. And one of the things that should be in the rating is whether there's multiple beneficial results from taking the surface water and recharging it, which means if there's a flooding issue in certain areas, I'm pretty sure the water rights aren't going to be a problem. because you're mitigating flooding and also recharging. And I will find that document that I read recently, because they are trying to help improve the ability to recharge using surface water.
I know a few years ago, they made a change that eased it for drinking water. So you can now put drinking water in. It used to, you had to go through the same rigmarole, even though you're putting drinking water in recharge. So, but now they've really eased that. So that had happened.
And at some point, maybe once you get a little further along, maybe we would want to have a discussion of the weighting of the different rating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Leave that backwards
seriously.
quickly. Yes,
I mean, you know, I know it sounds funny, but, and then the grading later. Okay, we will move on to the next item, which happens to,
I think we have
Oh.
to make a
no, I think,
I think that it was just a,
It was theory, it was supposed to we do motions for our
Motion.
changes, but I think
Yeah, if you have any, desired changes, then that's what the motions are about.
Rob's on the screen.
Or if you'd like, our plan was just to bring back an update once we have filled out this matrix and we're ready to, present you with that filled out. But if you want something different than that, then we can do that.
It sounded like you were inclined to look at sites 1 through 10 plus 16, but I don't know if the
But we can
motion
make a
was made
motion.
for that, so.
well, I'll make a motion that we prioritize sites 1 through 10 and 16.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I.
Look at
Opposed?
those to the others.
Okay. And then I'll make a motion that we make sure we also look at the site at the entrance to Aptos High.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
I.
Opposed? Okay, that motion
and I
carries.
guess one more though, just on the multiple benefits, adding a line to your
Criteria.
criteria.
Thank you.
I'd like to see that.
So looking at, so,
I don't
Giving
think we need a
Add-
motion for that.
I don't
okay,
think we
just
need
giving,
motions for any of these, but
okay,
it's okay.
well, just to clarify direction, so. And then, do you have a time frame for bringing it back?
We hope in a couple of months, since it is a lot of information we're pulling together.
Yeah.
But if it happens sooner, then we'll bring it.
That's fine.
I don't want to see it back until you've made substantial, progress. So whatever you decide, that's,
All right, we move on to item 6.7 then, which is the mini grant for the garden fair.
Correct. So the district has budgeted funds to support water conservation-related educational events and programs held by outside organizations. And we've had this grant program for several years. Applications are approved first come, first serve until all funds for the fiscal year have been depleted. In this year's budget, we had $4,000 for two $2,000 grants, and those are still unused. We had a request for funding from the Garden Fair, which is a nonprofit community organization advocating for ecological responsible gardening and water-wise gardening. And they're requesting funding for their 12th annual Garden Fair. This is a one-day event. It's free admission. It's held in Scotts Valley. And the Water Conservation Coalition that consists of the district and the other county agencies will be staffing a booth there. Not all of the other member agencies are contributing this year, but several are, and that's called out in the memo. And I just want to say that as far as the Water Conservation Coalition goes, we kind of, agencies trade off their support, and we have agencies that contribute to programs that happen within our district, such as the Cabrillo College classes, where a lot of our customers go. And then likewise, if we think that the event is attended by our customers, we have generally supported those in the past. So this year, the Garden Fair is requesting $2,000 full $2,000 grant award, and their request is laid out in attachment 1. And that's all I have for this item. And we do have a representative from the Garden Fair here, Tom Carwin, is attending tonight and can likely answer any questions you might have about the event or the funding request.
Right, does anyone in the public wish to speak on this item?
Thank you, Becky Steinbruner. I'm a gardener, and that event is one of the most amazing events that is put on in the area, and it's very well attended. What I like about the event is it hosts a wide range of garden-related speakers, but a lot of hands-on things. And I don't know about you, but when I go to like the county fair and I'm handed all kinds of brochures, it's sort of numbing and it really doesn't make a difference. But when you can provide something like this garden fair does, that's a real hands-on thing, it's something that really engages people, especially young people. And I think those kinds of things really get taken home and put into action. So I just want to thank Tom and Cheryl for putting on this event tirelessly for a long time, and it really is a great event. We're lucky to have them, that they do this. And thank you for supporting them.
Thank you for your input. And I think we have supported them for a number of years.
11.
Okay. Questions?
I think this is the kind of thing that where we could take a little bit of money and magnify an outreach that could benefit the district in the end, because we have a strong interest in changing people's landscaping habits. I mean, we just had a letter came in today about, somebody complaining about their water bill because they started watering their yard. So I think the more we can support the dissemination of that kind of information in a way that seems really attractive. I've only been to it once, but it seems extremely cost effective.
Any other comments?
Just an observation I made, which has nothing to do with this at all, but I wanted to mention it since it's about conservation. I was really chagrined when a house on my street got put up for sale, and what they did was they tore out their water-wise garden and put in grass. It pained me.
I'll move approval of the grant.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much for your good work. There is some written correspondence, a couple that have been responded to. And any questions or comments on those? If not, we do have a closed session.
I think it's Director Daniels' request.
Okay. So we will adjourn to closed session. Thank you and good night.